getting the exposure to grow your small wedding business can be difficult. With millions of engaged couples using The Knot to plan their weddings and find vendors, advertising on our sites will connect you with more couples than anywhere else online. Meet engaged couples where they're already searching for vendors like you, and let us deliver leads to help you grow your business. Visit vendors.thenot.com/podcast to sign up today. Mention code podcast15 during your free onboarding session for 15% off your first month.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 386, interview with Damien Lewis about his latest book, Agent Josephine, American Beauty, French Hero, British Spy. Mr. Lewis, the author of Churchill's Secret Warriors, Hunting the Nazi Bomb, and many other World War II tomes, has written about the beautiful but scrappy Josephine Baker during the war. She had it all until the Nazis invaded her beloved France. Now, she will fight back, but in her own special way. Mr. Lewis, thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure as always. It's good to be back.
Absolutely. I was just telling my wife, I think this is your third or fourth time on the show. So then she turned to me and she said, well, get his address and send him his part of the royalties, because that's not fair. So she made a valid point. No, but you've written so many books on World War II and other subjects. I'm sure you'll be back on the show, but I'm glad you wrote this book because, like most people who have read about World War II, yeah, I've heard the name Josephine Baker. I know she was an American who went to Paris, and she sang songs in film and stage, and I know she did something to help defy the Nazis. But that was pretty much the extent of what I knew about her. But underneath it all, after reading your book, besides the smiles and the beauty and the talent, there was a very talented, brave, and compassionate person under all that. And she wanted to do her part, and she certainly did love France.
Yeah, I mean, Josephine, the thing about her was she was tough. She was really tough. Mm-hmm. She was a street fighter. She was unbreakable. And, she'd fought tooth and nail and hard to make it, as a global superstar, which was what she was, right. Prior to the war. She was the most photographed woman in the world.
Wow.
Just prior to the war, and very high earning and hugely successful across Europe, not just in France. Mm-hmm. And when, of course, the spectre of Nazi Germany and Blitzkrieg and the onward march of the German war machine threatened to crush all the world's democracies, all the world's freedoms, all the things that she had experienced and now held very dear to her heart. You can imagine, for her especially, this was a fight from which she could not turn away. So a lot of people have asked me, well, she was American, so when war broke out, why did she not do what the majority of Americans did, not all of them, but the majority, and return as neutral citizens to a neutral country? Right. Well, Josephine did not. She chose to stand and to fight.
Yeah. Well, not only did she love France and she came to appreciate and adore French culture, but it's not like she had an easy time in the United States growing up. Could you kind of give us an idea of her earlier life and kind of the struggles that she went through that propelled her to want to move to Europe?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Josephine was born in St. Louis and born into poverty to a black mother, and her father's unknown. Could have been a white German guy, could have been a Hispanic. Right. But she was born into a very, very impoverished household and background. And, to give you an indication of the kind of poverty she suffered as a child, she was... As a small child, she was part of a street gang which stole coal from locomotives so they could go and heat, take it back home and heat their homes. Right. She went to school barefoot. In fact, she pretty much bombed out of school, in her very early teens. And fairly shortly, she ran away, basically, from home and joined a traveling dancing troupe because she had this suspicion, this idea that maybe, just maybe, she could use song and dance as a way to escape the crushing poverty of her early years. And she, canny, street smart, she realized that really the only place to break through, was Broadway and New York. And she made her way there eventually by kind of her mid-teens. She managed to get herself a part on a show on Broadway. But fairly quickly, she also realized that as a black female, she really was never going to break through in America. And it was because of the Jim Crow laws and segregation that it really was not going to be possible for her to achieve her potential as she saw it. And so when she was age 19, she was approached by an impresario, a theatre manager, who happened to be putting on a new show in Paris,
right?
So the capital of France, called the Revue Negre, which planned to be a very kind of risky, provocative show featuring a lot of black artists. And she asked Josephine to play the lead female role.
Wow. And
Josephine kind of took her heart in her hands, and very daunted, had never left America, and decided to take the plunge and sail for Paris and Europe, and to try to see if she could make it in the old world, having heard that there Europe was largely free from prejudice, or comparatively free from prejudice compared to the USA, free from segregation. And she turned up in Paris. She performed in the Revue Negre. It was extremely controversial, but it met with rave reviews. It took Europe by storm. And within a matter of years, bear in mind, she was only 19 when she went to Paris. Wow. By her very early 20s, she was a sellout star across Europe, touring all the main capitals, acclaimed across the capitals of those nations, and earning a very large amount of money. And shortly thereafter, she was, performing in movies, and really had made it as, one of the world's really first global superstars. Right. And so it was within that context that, of course, the drums of war started beating from Berlin, and she began to perceive that, there was the specter of Nazism was rising from Germany.
Right. When I was reading about her life, the phrase that kept coming to my mind was, "That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger." So she was toughened up by the earlier years of her life. But you made a very good point. She wasn't just pretty. She didn't just have a nice voice. She didn't just was a good dancer or had a nice body. She had a magnetism to her. And as we're going to see, that is going to be used by her quite brilliantly when she's talking to people, trying to gather information, people she would rather not be talking to, like Germans, the Nazi officers. But she was able to turn on the charm, and we'll get to all that. But before we jump too far into it, so a true rags to riches kind of story. Again, that's something to certainly admire, especially with all of her limitations and the prejudices against her. But I wanted to ask before we moved on too much. So you've written, I don't know how many books about World War II. I lost count. So obviously you have an interest in Josephine. That makes sense. But what was it about her or her story that you decided to stop and dedicate a couple of years of your life to telling her story?
Well, it's been a 10-year project.
Wow.
So it's been a hell of a long burn. And
right.
She first came to my attention, just some snippet on the media mentioning her role as a spy in World War II.
Right.
Very, almost no detail at all. And I thought, well, that's impossible. How could someone of Josephine Baker's stature and instant recognizability, how could that person possibly serve as a spy? Because, my understanding, our archetypal idea of a spy is the grey man or woman, the person who serves in the shadows, is unnoticed by everyone, and that's how they gather their intelligence. Yeah. So my curiosity was piqued, to put it mildly, and I began to dig. Mm-hmm. And then the more I kind of looked into the story, the more utterly compelling it became. And when I kind of realized that Josephine was, yes, she was a standout spy for France, but also crucially, she was a standout spy for all the Allies. Very shortly after war broke out, she was standout spy for London, for Britain, and then in due course, a standout war-winning spy for Washington and America. Wow. And when I realized the breadth of what she had achieved, and the broad church that she had served as an agent, and the way that she had used her stardom as her cloak and her dagger, I thought, this is a story that has to be told.
Absolutely. I knew about the French stuff a little bit. I didn't know the British. I didn't know the Americans. And so we'll probably touch on some of that later. But a couple of minutes ago, and this is very important to me, and you actually start your book with it, the subject of sources. I got the sense, and please tell me, but I got the sense as you're doing your research, you were probably happier with some entities versus others. I was just wondering how tight-lipped some countries might yet still be about their activities during World War II. I was wondering what your impressions were as you were gathering sources from various locations. Did you run into some obstacles in certain places?
The British Intelligence Service never releases any files about its activities, ever.
Wow.
So that's just one example, even older than World War II. So there's no hope. I mean, occasionally something, by accident slips into the ether, but it's extremely rare, and it is by accident. They have a blanket secrecy policy. I was extremely fortunate in that one of the key standout characters in the book, the British spy master, Commander Wilfred Biffy Dunderdale, the guy who was the Secret Intelligence Service spy master in Paris just prior to the war, guy with a seminal role in Josephine's story. I was deeply fortunate in that his private archive, because Dunderdale never spoke about his spying activities throughout his life and went to his grave with his secrets, but his private archive, his letters, his documents from the war and before and after, was acquired by a chap who's a British chap who lives in the States, a chap called Paul Biddle, a real gentleman. And he reached out to me, heard I was researching this story, and said, "Hey, look, I've got, Commander Dunderdale's private archive. Would you like to have access?" And I was like, "Please." And so he sent me copies of all this stuff. That's amazing. That kind of stuff is gold dust. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There were so many different layers and so many grades of intelligence and material. And one had to try to shift the veracity and the truth of all these different sources and stories. And more than that, you had to try to get to the agenda of why they might have told the version of the story they had and what they might have been trying to hide. So trying to simplify it. For example, of course, America wasn't invaded during the Second World War and occupied, and nor was Britain, but France was. And so during the occupation, the Nazis, the Gestapo managed to pit, French man against French man and French woman against French woman. And sometimes, that was even within families or certainly within communities and villages. And so these wounds, these enmities went very deep and were very, very vicious and long lasting. And they still pertain to this day. There are still these fractious, feelings and enmities between those who were collaborators and those who were resistance. And so many people have written, certainly many people in France and many French men and women have written versions of what happened during the war, in part to kind of, keep in keeping with those kind of bitter and difficult rivalries. And then, of course, some of the activity that Josephine and her comrades were engaged in the war, and thank God they did this, were, if not illegal, certainly on the boundaries of what would be legal and acceptable outside of a time of war. So during the war, they thought, we'll make a pact with the devil if we have to defeat Nazi Germany. But after the war, suddenly these activities that they had merrily engaged in, working with forgers, assassins, the mafia, whoever it might be, were, it had become deeply questionable. So you couldn't actually risk telling the whole truth, perhaps. And so, yeah, there were all these different kind of agendas that one had to sort through to try and distill down the truth of the story.
I'm glad you said that. So, and based on your experience, was the French government, you've already said about the British, and I think that's a wise policy. They just don't release anything because you never know, it might affect something else. How did the French square up against the British as far as access to information?
I've got to take my hat off to the French. They released a tranche of wartime documents about espionage activities, which included Josephine Baker, Jacques Abtey, her espionage partner, Paul Pelol, the head of the Deuxième Bureau's German desk, and various others, without which I could not have written this book, or I certainly could not have written it and told the story as it truly should have been told. So, getting those documents was absolutely key to some of the major revelations in the book. For example, the fact that Josephine spied for not just the French, but for the British and the Americans, and who those people were that she was working with. So, the French should be commended for doing so, the French government. It's, those documents were absolutely key. And without those, I would have had a much harder task. And they only did so very recently, by the way, in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, because when you said that about the British government, I'm like, I can understand that. up to a point, but after a certain amount of time, you would like to think it couldn't affect things. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Bully for the French government for releasing that, because if I remember correctly from your book, Josephine, like a lot of other people during the war, she goes to her grave with some of her own secrets as well. So it's not like she said, here's every little tiny thing I did during the war. Just some of it went to the grave with her.
Yeah, quite the reverse, actually.
Right.
Josephine, during her life, almost never spoke about her espionage activities during the war.
Right.
Almost never, and certainly in no detail. She very much did go to her grave with her secrets, and she was very. She always said the wartime. Her wartime activities were the proudest part of her life. That was what she was most proud of. Her principled, undaunted, unyielding, brave, courageous, death-defying stand against Nazism was what had defined her life, really.
Yes.
That was her position, but she never spoke about the detail. And I mentioned Dunderdale. You can talk about any number of these figures. Most of them go to their graves in silence.
Wow. That reminds me of something I read about the people at Bletchley Park, because a lot of information that Josephine's getting is going to end up at Bletchley. But even those people, they would go, do their work, go home, never talking about it again. When the war's over, they go back to their lives. You just don't talk about it because it was duty. It was something that you did. Your country's in a crisis and you stepped up. And that's exactly what she did for her adopted country.
Yeah, sure. I mean, she was... I suppose she was hungering for a way to fight, even before war was declared. And, she'd seen the rise of Nazi Germany. She witnessed it at first hand. She'd been in Germany, in Berlin, performing, in the run-up to the war.
Right.
And, of course, she'd arrived there expecting, as she had before in Germany, to have wild, fantastic time, and instead had been met by horrendous abuse and racism and Nazi elites and brown shirts and black shirts and abuse. And after 3 weeks, she'd abandoned her show and fled Germany. That was the first of several such experiences. And actually, Goebbels, the Nazi Germany's propaganda minister, had actually put Josephine on the front of a pamphlet, identifying and decrying the so-called enemies of the Nazi state. So she was already identified as a target of, Hitler and his cronies. Right. And so in a sense, she knew what was coming, and she had to find a means to fight. And so when the French intelligence service decided that because they were so woefully underfunded and so woefully understaffed, prior to the war, and when they decided that they had to try to look for what they called the honorable correspondents, these freelance voluntary spies, people who spied for love of country, for patriotism, right. When they decided that was the only way they could try and counter the Nazi threat, the threat of spying from Germany, Josephine was one of those that they identified as being a potential agent.
That's incredible, because again, she's not French, she is American. But I just want to stress something before we move on. So she has a hard time in America. She finds almost everything she's ever wanted in France. She goes to Germany. It's kind of like America, where she's being treated bad because of her color, and the fact that she's a woman. And so, yes, how could she not want to defend France, this place that has taken her into their heart? Like you said, she's the most photographed woman. She's rich. She has literally everything, and it's because of the culture in France. How could she not want to defend that? So my next question is, and I found this part of your book absolutely amazing. So it's kind of a long one, but bear with me. So she's in Paris. She has fame. She has fortune. She's been accepted. Like you said, there's some dark rumblings coming out of Berlin as the Nazis, they grow as a party, but then they take over the country in 1933. But there are people in France, like there are people in any country, very intelligent, worldly, sophisticated people who can detach from emotion and go, you know what? War's coming. And you know what? It pains me to say this, but I think France is going to fall. After France falls, we need to have information so we can begin to climb back to fighting back to freedom, to liberty, whatever you want to call it. And so you're right, they're going to need these volunteers because they don't have the money. But there are people literally going, there's a big crash coming. We can't stop it, but we have to prepare for what comes after that. And so people like Josephine are contacted.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the French intelligence service,
Wow.
Colonel Paul Pelol, Jacques Aptais, and others, working hand in glove with the British intelligence service, the
Right.
secret intelligence service, Biffy Dunderdale, the Paris spy master, they knew that war was coming, and they knew that France would fall. They
Wow.
gave warnings to their governments.
Right.
They said, and their governments would not listen because the First World War was just a few years ago. Millions had died. The horrors were still fresh in people's minds. The war wounded were still
Oh,
walking the
right.
streets,
Yeah.
and none of the French government, the British government, none of them wanted to countenance another war with the old foe, and so their warnings were falling on deaf ears, and so they, in their meetings, they prepared for what they knew was coming. France would fall. It would not stand against the onslaught, against the blitzkrieg. And once it fell, they would need a fallback option, some means to carry on the fight. What they didn't foresee,
Right.
and why they were so blindsided, and why it was so catastrophic, was they just didn't foresee the speed of the fall of France, that it would be a matter of days,
Right.
and the French resistance would collapse, and so therefore they would be overrun and overwhelmed.
That's incredible. So yeah, and like they're about to be overrun. France has been tearing itself apart since the end of the Great War. Since 1933, Germany's been coming together under Hitler. He's got set priorities. He's got everybody, walking the same line. So they gear up for war rather quickly. The French are fighting themselves, and so yeah, it's not going to go well. But to literally have to go up to someone and go, "I need you to risk everything to help protect this country that you love, and we're not going to pay you. In fact, you're going to have to pay your own way." But she is more than willing to do that because she truly loves this country, and she hates to see, what has happened to it.
Yeah, so I mean, Josephine is mooted as one of these, freelance spies, these honourable correspondents, as they were called.
Right.
And there's not a lot of enthusiasm at first, in the Deuxième Bureau, the French counter-espionage service, because they have a prejudice against women. That was kind of the spirit of the time, especially in these circles.
Right.
But more importantly, they're worried that she will be one of those, I paraphrase, but one of those fragile showbiz personalities who will shatter like glass at the first sign of any danger.
Right.
That's what they're worried about. And of course, there's been the example of Mata Hari, the World War One, French performing artist who was recruited as a spy and was allegedly a double agent, and cast a pall over all of that kind of activity. And so it's actually Jacques Aptais, the Captain Jacques Aptais, the French Deuxième Bureau agent, who's tasked to go out and recruit Josephine, and he doesn't want to, and he drives out there,
Right.
with his heart in his boots. He's not keen to do this, and he arrives at her chateau in Paris, expecting to, find the archetypal Josephine, a ball gown, dripping in jewelry, maybe her pet cheetah Chiquita on a diamond-studded leash. That was the image of her, and instead he finds. He hears a voice from the bushes, and out pops this head, and it's got a battered felt hat atop it, dressed in gardening clothes, clutching a rusty tin can full of snails, and she's been collecting them from the gardens to feed to her pet ducks, because Josephine was a lifelong lover of animals. And this is not what Aptais expecting at all. This is the down-to-earth, street fighting, salt of the earth Josephine that no one really sees. And she takes him into the chateau, and they sit in front of the fireplace, and the butler serves champagne, and he starts to sound her out, because like you say, you can't just say, "Hey, do you want to be a spy for France?"
Right.
It doesn't quite work that way. You've got to make small talk, try and get a sense of the person.
Right.
And what's key here is that Aptais starts to realize something absolutely crucial. He's getting treated to a very, very, very powerful, up close, personal episode of the Josephine effect. She had this ability, and I've had it explained to me by those people who danced with her on the stage at the time. Her Jean-Pierre Reggiori, one of her dance partners, now lives in New York, a Frenchman, but lives in New York, explained this to me in great detail. And he said, listen, Josephine had this unique ability to reach out from the stage and make every single person in the audience feel as if she was singing and dancing just for him or for her.
Wow.
He said it was unique, that ability to reach out and touch people. And Abte is being treated to a brilliant example of that in Josephine's chateau. And he suddenly realizes, my gosh, if we can harness that ability to the spying game, she will be unbeatable. And so he pops to the question, hey, listen, will you spy for France? And she says words to the effect, listen, France has made me everything I am. And, I am willing to give this country my life. And so that's how she's recruited. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Amazing story.
Yeah. So he gets a glimpse of the steel behind that smile. And I just love that part. She's like, she's just got these worldly eyes and she's like, just like looking right through him. So I just thought that was a neat scene in the book. Could you give us an idea some of her earlier missions, because I think, and tell me if I've got this right, because not everything was written down, because she went to her grave with so many secrets, you kind of got to suss things out. But there were some very specific things that she helped out with that I think impressed a lot of people early on. And like you said, they realized she's the real deal when it comes to this counter-espionage.
Yeah, so her first aid mission, which was given to her by Abte pretty much like directly after that recruiting scene in the chateau, they know that she has this amazing in with the Italians because she's toured Italy. She's befriended Mussolini, the Italian fascist leader, for better or worse. And she's a iconic figure across Italy and with Italian high society. And so the Italian embassy in Paris will welcome Josephine with open arms. They know that. And what the Allies really need to know at this moment, that's France and Britain in particular, is what will be the intention of the Italian government, the Italian fascist government, if and when Germany declares war. Will Italy join the Axis? Will it remain neutral? Will it fight alongside the Allies? What are their intentions? They don't know. They tasked Josephine to find out. And a week after she's been given this mission, she calls Abte. She's very excited. Nothing is said over the phone lines, of course, because everyone's listening to everyone's phone calls. But they meet in central Paris. Josephine's driving her luxury Delage sports car, and she's so overexcited by her success. She's driving so crazily. She gets arrested by the police. They think it's a drunk driver. Then they realize it's Josephine Baker. They let her off. Jacques Abte's pulling his hair out, thinking, "My gosh, can I ever control and harness and manage this agent that I'm supposed to be handling?" And then she tells him what she's found out. She said, "Yes, Italy will join Nazi Germany. Not only will Italy join Nazi Germany, but they have already cut a deal to do exactly that secretly behind closed doors." And of course, that intelligence wings its way to the highest echelons of Paris and London, and suddenly, people know that she is the real deal. She can deliver. I mean, she's got the intelligence by seducing, whether intellectually or physically or both, we don't know, one of the military attaches at the Italian embassy. So she has worked her charms, that magic, and come up trumps. And that's just the first of one of many of these kind of groundbreaking missions in the war. Right,
because you make this point in the book, and of course this was one of the main reasons she became an HC, an honorary correspondent, because this is a time of war. Everybody's hunkering down, everybody's trying to survive, and yet a famous, rich, international star, in whatever terms, should still be expected to do some traveling. So between her intelligence, her steel, that is her personality, and her, people are just going to expect her to travel, that's the perfect cover. So she can work for them, and yet she can still move around, and in theory, no one's going to bat an eye.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that Josephine, because, she tours the world, and when she tours the world, she has, dozens of tour trunks with her costumes, her dresses and her jewels and her musical score sheets, all that stuff she's got to carry with her. Right. It's the perfect conduit by which to smuggle intelligence, whether it's written on her musical score sheets or secreted in her tour luggage, whatever. Right. And of course, she has the perfect excuse to be crossing borders. Hey, I'm Josephine Baker. I'm going to Rio to sing. I'm going to Lisbon to sing. Even in times of war, people need to be entertained. Right. So that's the very idea which, is the double endorsement for her as a potential agent for the Allies. But, it's even to the extent that those who knew France would fall, and they knew that they needed a means to reestablish the flow of intelligence to London. Right. even before that happened, they thought Josephine could be the person to do that because she, almost uniquely amongst us, has that ability and that cast iron excuse to travel and not get stopped and not be suspected.
That's incredible because it's somewhere around this time now. Again, it's hard to tell how much Josephine was involved or even maybe at all, but there were a couple of things that came out, like getting the Luftwaffe codes to London, the German plans to take over Gibraltar, to use Ireland to attack Britain, to send converted Irish agents to the U.S. So the Germans certainly did have a lot of plans, and some of this information, either through her or through the French intelligence, does get back to London, and they have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, so, I mean, after the fall of France, June 1940, the French intelligence service, those who wish to continue the fight, basically goes underground. So individuals like Paylor and Abtey, they are still gathering intelligence as best they can in a defeated country, yet they have no means to send it to London and Britain, which was at that time the only dog in the fight anymore. Literally every single conduit, every single agent, every single radio transmitter has been shut down. So there is no way to contact London. It was so bad, in fact, that when Churchill was voted into power, one of the first things he did was had a meeting with his intelligence chiefs and said, "Get me back into France." Wow. I don't care what it takes. We need visibility in France because without intelligence, we cannot win the war. And, immediately that was the Battle of Britain and then the Blitz, of course, and then stopping the German invasion of Britain, which all knew was coming. So, the stakes were extremely high. There's all this intelligence being gathered by Paylor and Abtey and their underground network, but no way to get it to London. And so Josephine is tasked to carry it all. And she's tasked to travel from France in November 1940 to Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, so crossing any number of borders, Gestapo checkpoints, customs checkpoints, with all her tour luggage is stuffed full of this priceless intelligence. I mean, this treasure trove of information, that the French intelligence service has gathered since the fall of France. And again, the only way she can do so, she can get through, is to use her stardom, her Josephine Baker persona as her cloak and her dagger. And so when she turns up at these, they're traveling by rail and then by air. When she turns up at all these checkpoints and all, and expects to face questioning and interrogation and have a luggage search, what actually happens is, all of the people who should be stopping her are so blown away by her star appearance, they kind of shout to their wives to come and get her autograph, grab a photograph with her, and she manages to get through. It's absolutely extraordinary.
That's incredible. Yeah, I love that part because there are people who are on the roads. There are people, if they're lucky, they get to take a train. Here she is flying. And obviously it's a little safer because it's hard to check luggage if it's in the back of a moving plane. But I don't think I appreciated until I read your book how vital Portugal, Lisbon was as far as a hub, because it's a neutral country in Europe during the war, and so a lot of agents are going to flock there, and a lot of information is going to be exchanged. And so, that's her opportunity to get into the bigger leagues of espionage and counter-espionage.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Portugal was the spying hub of Europe because it was this neutral location, absolutely crucial strategically, geographically for Europe. Of course, major supplier of wolfram, tungsten, this crucial metal for tipping munitions, so hard, so heavy. So, Portugal was the location of the Wolfram Wars. That's what it became known in the Second World War. This covert, ultra secret battle between Britain and Germany to monopolize the wolfram, because whoever could get those supplies, would have a much greater chance of winning the war. And it's there in the British Embassy in Lisbon that, there's a secret intelligence cell, and, that Josephine is tasked to deliver her tour luggage with that secret documentation, those dozens of files that have been gathered by the French intelligence service, with Jacques Abtey, her French intelligence handler, acting as her, as a cohort to help get her through. Absolutely extraordinary that they managed to do it. It's an incredibly successful mission. And when that material is flown from Lisbon to London and arrives in London and reaches Commander Dunderdale, their secret intelligence service handler from now on, he telegrams them very shortly, sends a telegram to the British Embassy and says, "We are delighted with what you have delivered to us."
Wow.
And he gives them their next orders.
That's incredible, because normally if you do your job, that's what's expected of you. The superior doesn't say anything. But if they're going to take the time to send a telegram in 1940, the world, then obviously they must have been very impressed by what they were reading out of those boxes.
Yeah, sure. And there's another reason for the communication as well. One, they are massively impressed. Two, Josephine and Jacques Apte were determined, as they were traveling to Lisbon, to fly from there to London to meet with General de Gaulle, the Free French leader, the man who was trying to lead the French resistance in exile. Well, Dunderdale asked them not to. That's a polite way of putting it. Dunderdale won't countenance it, and he won't countenance it for several reasons. The key reason, the main reason, is because what Josephine and Jacques have just managed to do is reopen the intelligence pipeline, the flow of information from France to London. That's absolutely groundbreaking. And what Dunderdale wants them to do is to keep that pipeline flowing. And to do that, one of them, if not both of them, have to return to France, link up with Pelol again, Colonel Pelol, and get the pipeline pumping information.
Oh, my goodness.
And so Dunderdale says, one of you has to go back into France immediately. You have to turn around, go straight back in, find Pelol, and get this information pumping to London. We need more of this stuff. And so Josephine says, hey, send me. And so she jumps on a plane, and very shortly, she's only been in Lisbon a matter of days. She's flying back into France, back into the country she just left, solo, on her own, on a mission to find Pelol and link up with him again.
That's very brave of her, because the Germans have already made it clear that they don't like her. But the other thing was, I think, and I don't know the exact wording, but she promised when Germany invaded France that she would not perform until all the Nazis were either out of Paris or out of the country in general. And so it looks like she's breaking her word, but at the same time, she's got a much bigger mission that she's on, other than just worrying about her pride.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Josephine had said she would never perform in France once or until all the Nazis had left Germany. Well, she's persuaded otherwise by Pelol. When she meets back up with him in France, in Marseille, in the port city on the Mediterranean, Pelol says, look, Josephine, you have to perform. Right. And you have to perform for two reasons. One, it's your cloak and dagger. If Josephine doesn't perform, it's just too suspicious.
Right.
You're making yourself even more of a target. And secondly, Josephine, you need the money, because she had refused to get paid. Right. I mean, Jacques Capet was going to get paid for his work as an intelligence agent, for the Allies, as he should do. But Josephine had said, no, whatever work I do for the Allies in the war, I will do for free. And not only was she doing it for free, but she was using her own funds, obviously, to fund her intelligence activities, her flights, her work, and all the rest of it. And so Pelol rightly said, listen, you need to perform, for your cover, but also to earn money. So they put on a show of La Creole, the comic opera, in Marseille, that Christmas of 1940. It was, a sellout, fantastic performance. Right. But it had to be cut short, because before the end of the show, Pelol warned her, the Gestapo are coming for you, and you have to flee France.
Oh, that was the part of the book. I'm like, get out of there. It's like watching a horror movie. Get out quick. But but here, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to add something onto that?
No, sure. You're absolutely right. Yeah, sure.
So, so the good news is that she's performing, she's earning money that she needs. It helps with her cover. At the same time, as we're going to find out, you can only stress your body out for so long before, no matter your age, it's going to catch up with you. So if I could jump in time a little bit, I believe it's early 1941, and she has to get out of there, so she goes to North Africa. And again, she's still going to work. She's still going to gather information. She's still going to entertain, because that's her job. But there's also Allied troops in North Africa. So not only is she still being an entertainer, which is something she's very good at, she can actually bring smiles and laughter to those who are giving their all for the cause.
Yeah, sure. So, Josephine played this double role in North Africa. One, she was still playing a vital role as a spy, as an espionage agent, and she was still pumping that intelligence into London and in due course into Washington itself. Wow. But also, once the torch landings, the Operation Torch landings took place, and American forces landed in North Africa, the biggest amphibious operation of the war so far,
Right.
Almost on the scale of D-Day in terms of its complexity, North Africa to be the springboard of Europe. Once that had happened, the Americans in particular realized that Josephine was a gold-plated entertainer and would be a fantastic asset to bolster the morale of the troops. And the American military offered her an exclusive contract,
Wow.
a very lucrative contract, to perform for them, for American troops, for the rest of the war. And Josephine again refused. And she said no, for two reasons. One, I will never get paid for the activities that I carry out on behalf of the Allies and freedom and against the Nazis in World War II. And secondly, I can't just perform for American troops.
Yeah.
I have to perform for all troops, regardless of their nationality, as long as they're fighting in freedom's cause.
Absolutely. As an American, I feel comfortable in saying that was a bit tacky of us to try to scoop her up for ourselves. But that's kind of how we think, all or nothing. So please forgive us for that. But
no worries, yeah.
But so she's performing for the troops. She's pushing herself. She's still trying to gather information. She's starting to have health issues. But the one part that I really liked, because in the book you stress, London is trying very hard in all different ways to keep Vichy France away from Free France. It's just ugly. They're going to start fighting. It's just not good. And so here she is. She finds out that the Free French troops do not have their own organized entertainment for them. She adds them onto her list. So as busy as she is, she finds a whole nother group of people to entertain, which of course I'm sure they're very appreciative. But at some point, her health issues do catch up to her.
Yeah, so these repeated back-to-back missions, and often she's almost invariably now actually she's carrying out solo espionage missions because bear in mind only she has the ability to travel still. Abtay, her supposed handler, can no longer leave North Africa. He can't even leave Morocco because he just doesn't have the visas. He can't travel. Josephine can travel pretty much anywhere she wants to still, not to Nazi Germany obviously, or to occupied territories largely, but to Spain, Portugal, even into France, into Vichy France. She's still free to travel, and across North Africa, no problem at all. And so she is carrying out these back-to-back solo espionage missions. She's risking all, and she's also, flogging herself to entertain the troops. And she does fall terribly ill. She's fighting death. She's on death's door for months and months and months on end. This is in North Africa, in Morocco, in Casablanca. And she's taken into a private clinic called the Comte Clinic in Casablanca in Morocco, where, for many, many months, it is feared she's going to lose her life many, many times over. But they managed to make a virtue out of a terrible necessity. She and Jacques Abtay realized fairly quickly, and this is their genius, they realized that actually they can make a bonus out of where Josephine is, because this private clinic in Casablanca, everybody has a reason to go there. It doesn't matter who you are, what your nationality is, what your religion is, what your beliefs are, what gender you are, what age you are even. Everybody has a reason to go visit the superstar, Josephine Baker, when they realize she's on her deathbed in Casablanca. So her clinic becomes the perfect meeting point for all the espionage individuals and all the military leaders and all the political leaders working for the Allies secretly or otherwise in Casablanca, which is part of Vichy France at the time. And so her clinic room becomes this kind of inviolable, sacrosanct hub from which, intelligence meetings can be gathered. It's a dead letter drop where they can drop secret intelligence parcels for each other, and where Josephine becomes almost like the spy master, orchestrating all now, whereas Jacques Abtay is out there kind of at the coalface trying to gather intelligence. And it's fascinating how, from being the rookie agent and the student and Abtay being the master and the handler, the tables are pretty much turned. And by, midway through the war, she's become the spy master and he's the agent out there, gathering intelligence in the field.
Right. I love that part of it because, to take something as unpleasant as very bad health, and to turn it into a positive. I mean, you must really be committed to a cause to think in terms like that. But that's the kind of spy I would be. Let me sit here and you all come to me. I'm pretty lazy. Oh, and by the way, on a side note, my wife read that section of your book about Morocco. So now we have to go there. So thanks a lot for that. So
Hey, you should go. You should stay in that hotel. You'll have a wild time.
I do understand that. So she's having these serious health issues, but she's still able to get the job done. However, this is the part of the interview where people don't like when I say, I would like to save a lot of the rest of it for the readers, because we have hardly touched the book. We have hardly touched her life. She does incredible things throughout the war. She does incredible things after the war, but I'm going to let the readers discover that on their own. However, there was one thing, before I let you go, when I first started talking to you, I said something like, I really didn't know much about Josephine, and so I was looking forward to your book. But it dawned on me as I'm halfway through your book, there's a lot of background, there's a lot of exposition, and it dawned on me, I'm glad you did that, because I don't think just a narrow biography of Josephine Baker would have made much sense. You got to give it the context. So by the time I'm finished reading this, I've got espionage, counter-espionage, spinning, lying from all these different countries. You feel like you understand that world a little bit better. And I was just wondering, to go down such a cynical path, which is what spying is all about. I was wondering what stood out to you as far as either practices or attitude or just the entire world of spycraft.
Do you know what really kind of struck me was that, and it's a comment that a number of people from that world have made to me, because obviously I've got various contacts in that world, and a lot of them have read the manuscript, many before publication, for which I'm very grateful. Anyway, a lot of them said to me, listen, you'll generally find that the greatest spies have had a really tough life. They've been forged in fire. You said it earlier, what doesn't break you makes you stronger. You need that. Mm-hmm. You need that absolute street fighter hardness. So when the going gets tough, the tough get going. When the rubber hits the road, Josephine was there because she had that in her soul. Right. And, she was fighting not just for a cause, not just for an idea. She was fighting for herself, for her own freedoms, and that made her such a world-beating spy. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have said to me, listen, okay, I can understand why she volunteered and was a spy in the first year, maybe the second year, but when she gets really ill, why doesn't she just say, I've done enough?
Right.
I'm going home. It's time for me to go back to America and get ill and get on with my life, get well and get on with my life, get healed. Why does she just keep going? Well, she was undaunted. She would not give up. And you speak to people in that world of espionage, and they tell you the agents who are like that are those who've had a really tough upbringing and have learned to be fighters from the start.
I love the way you describe that, because basically, if you have a hard time early on in life, you don't know anything else, and so everything is a fight. And I imagine if someone said to her, why are you still doing this? Because it still needs to be done. It doesn't matter that I'm sick. It doesn't matter that maybe the tide is turning on the war, but she still got to do it. So just real quick before I let you go, there's this tough, hard person that will not give up. She's near death. She's fighting. She's still doing everything. And she's, like you said, spending her own money, which is not inconsiderable. And yet at the same time, compare and contrast that to this woman in her mansion with all of her various animals. Could you just give us a short list of some of the animals that she kept around with her in her entourage? Because I thought that was just so endearing of her.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating part of the story. I talked earlier about how her superstardom was her cloak and her dagger. Mm-hmm. Well, the other part of her cloak and her dagger was her menagerie of exotic animals, because Josephine was defined before the war in all her performances by this exotic cast of animals she kept on the stage. Right. Her Great Dane, her monkeys, her marmoset, her python, her cheetah, Chiquita. I mean, all these animals, they were part of her act. Right. And then, there are times in the war when she's this super spy and she says, I need my menagerie of animals with me on this journey because no one will ever suspect Josephine Baker of being a spy if I'm surrounded by all these crazy animals trying to break free, running after them, capturing them. As long as they don't eat the secret intelligence service documents in my luggage, it's the perfect cover. And she does. She has these animals with her for the large part of the war, and they are the perfect shield. It's just another part of her genius. It goes back to that original question I asked myself: how could such a instantly recognizable superstar had been a spy? Well, that's why she was a spy.
Yeah. You see a star, I'm going to show you a star, and you're not ever going to think anything else of me. I fit the definition that you. So it's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. Mr. Lewis, thank you for coming on the show. Let's just go ahead and schedule your next interview because Lord knows you probably got another book coming out. But seriously, I did want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to let you have the last word on the incredible Josephine Baker. And if you wanted to mention your next project, that would be fine. But again, that's up to you.
Yeah, thank you. Miss. Always, it's a pleasure to be on the show, and I love being on your show because you know your stuff. You've read the books. You're so knowledgeable. But it's been an honor and a privilege, a challenge.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong, but it's been an honor and a privilege to write Josephine's story, her wartime story. This is her wartime story. There are many biographies of Josephine Baker. This is not a biography of Josephine Baker. This is the story of Josephine's war. It's the story of Agent Josephine. But it has been a real privilege and an honor, and I'm so glad that that I managed to get there because it was a tough, difficult 10-year journey.
Wow.
And we've had such amazing reactions all over the world to the book, so that's been edifying. And the next book, the one I'm just working on at the moment, in fact, I was in the recording studio today recording the audio book, is the story of really the SAS, the Special Air Service, the birth of special forces in the North African desert really early on in the war, those maverick, crazy, piratical founders of this modern form of fighting, and how they did that and how they took the war to General Rommel and the Afrika Korps in the North African desert at Britain's and the Allies' darkest hour. Wow. Cracking story, really, really engaging characters. You could not make these guys up. Really enjoying doing the audio book. These stories tell themselves.
That's incredible. I cannot wait. And is it coming out before this year's over with, if I can ask?
Yeah, sure. It's due for publication late October this year. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, and
so let's schedule something in.
Yeah, let's just go. I'll have my people call your people. It'd be great. Yeah. No, but this book, like you said, Agent Josephine, American Beauty, French Hero, British Spy. Oh, and by the way, I got your audio book for this, and you read it yourself. So I really enjoyed that as well. Talking to you so many times. So now your head is in my voice. I said that wrong. So your voice is in my head. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I guess we'll find out together. But Mr. Lewis, Thank you very much for your time and good luck with this book.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. A pleasure as always.